Afternoon, everybody. My name's Mark Bearded. I'm the managing partner of DLA Piper's offices here in Manchester and in Liverpool. I'm delighted to welcome you here to our offices for this special event, The Changing Face of Leadership. So today's event is co-hosted by the FTSE Women Leaders Review and Warren Partners. The FTSE Women Leaders Review is an independent, business-led framework supported by government, which sets recommendations to improve the representation of women on the boards and leadership teams of FTSE 350 and 50 of the UK's largest private companies. It adopts a unique, entirely voluntary approach, working with business on a significant scale to achieve gender balance. Denise Wilson, the Chief Executive of the review, is on the panel today, just to my right, and she's done a remarkable job leading this since, I think, around 2014. Although I gather that you may be stepping down from the role shortly, but more about that from Joëlle, I'm sure. Many congratulations on a job well done, Denise. I remember when the initiative was launched, listening to you on what I think was BBC Radio 4 at the time, I'm pretty certain it would have been, and thinking that the goal sounded quite unattainable. As a father of two daughters who never for a single moment thought that their careers would be limited by gender, and as a natural ally, I salute you and everyone involved in the review for all that you've done. The latest report was launched on 27th February this year, and copies have been left on your tables, so if you didn't have one before, you do now. The review's lasted over a decade, and it's made a significant impact in improving gender equality in British business and leading the way globally. Last year, the review celebrated achieving the 40% milestone for women on boards 3 years ahead of its target. The 2023 report shows that 35% of women are in leadership roles, making further progress towards the 2025 target of 40%. So the report is a heaven for a statistician, which I'm not, but just to show Denise that I have read it through in detail, I can see that when the review first started reporting on women in leadership in 2017, the figure was 24.5% in FTSE 350 companies, which was exactly the same as the figure that year for women on boards. I hope I've read that correctly. So whilst commendable progress has been made on the target for boards, that we haven't made progress at the same rate for leadership roles, and there remains work to be done. I'm sure that there are a number of reasons for that, including taking time for behaviours to change, building the pipeline and so on. But it is clear that we need to increase efforts to meet the leadership target. And when I read the report, or when I read in the report, that there have recently been some voices saying that progress for women has gone far enough, that's simply unacceptable. It's also great to be partnering today with Warren Partners in their 25th anniversary year. They're one of only 3 search firms recognised in the FTSE Women Leaders Review each year since its inception, which isn't surprising as their purpose has always been focused on building diverse boards and leadership teams. They're also the only search firm with a UK headquarters outside London, indeed here in the Northwest. I'll hand over shortly to Joëlle Warren at the far end of the panel, whom I've had the great pleasure of knowing for around 6 years now. Warren Partners are an executive search company, colloquially known to many of us as headhunters, although I'm not sure if that's a term that they would use themselves, as it implies perhaps a traditionally male and aggressive way of going about the job. And I know from a recent conversation with Joelle's colleague, Sam Malik, sitting in the audience today, that executive search is an incredibly complex and nuanced blend of art and science. So Joëlle is the founder of Warren & Partners, and she's now executive chair. She's someone I admire and respect greatly. She allies a great intellect with incredible enthusiasm and energy. She's someone who lives life to the full, contributes greatly to our society, and has made her mark in life. Joëlle founded Warren & Partners believing that you can succeed in business without losing in life, behaving ethically and treating others as you want to be treated yourself. And she lives and breathes those values which remain core to the business today. I met Joëlle through my involvement in the Northwest Business Leadership Team, an organisation whose members have a shared belief in the impact that good business can have in shaping the North West region as the best place to live, work and do good business together. The NWBLT's chair, I'll say that slowly, NWBLT's current chair, Simon Pepe from the pilot group, is here today. Now, I mention that in particular as the NWBLT has recently reaffirmed our dedication to promoting gender diversity in the workplace by developing and committing to the Delivering Women in Leadership Charter 2024. Improved representation of women and increased diversity in leadership drives business success. Recognising this, NWBLT members have pledged to increase female representation on leadership teams across this region. The Charter is one of the many ways that NWBLT, I knew I'd stumble over it at some stage, NWBLT supports gender equality. In 2018, we initiated the Rising Stars programme to nurture female talent and address gender inequality in the workplace, helping fill the pipeline I mentioned before. Through networking opportunities, inspirational speakers and mentoring, the Rising Stars are empowered to pursue senior positions within their organisations and beyond. I was pleased on behalf of DLA Piper to be able to commit to championing the Charter and will continue to do so. I was also delighted, having offered to host this event in August last year, to see that DLA Piper made the top 10 for women on boards in the top 50 private companies category. DLA Piper is fully committed to diversity, equity and inclusion, and our vision is to create a firm-wide inclusive culture where our clients recognise us as best in class. In 2021, we launched 3 DEI goals to help drive us towards a more equal and representative workforce, one of which is for at least 30% of our partnership to be women by 2025 and 40% by 2030. As of June 2023, and we'll be picking this up again in June this year when we get a new intake of partners, we're at 25% and making steady progress, and I'm confident we'll hit those targets. While we know that goals are important, they focus the minds and keep us as leaders accountable, we know that it goes beyond the numbers. It is the day-to-day behaviours and actions that make up a culture. That is why we're committed to creating a culture of inclusion where all our people at DLA Piper can thrive. Now, without any more ado, if I can please hand over to Joëlle, who's going to chair the panel session, and she will introduce you to our esteemed panel and chair the remainder of the session. And just to repeat our invitation to stay after the session for drinks and refreshments and networking. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, DLA, for hosting us so generously this afternoon. So I'm going to start by introducing you to the panel, and the first two are 2 female chief executives of iconic British brands here in the North, both of whom have been in place just about 2 years. And I'll start off with Roisin. So Roisin is the CEO of Greggs. She's come all the way over the Pennines today and is then heading off on a plane to Belfast from here. So she's travelled to join us. But Roisin's career started with Asda, 20 years in becoming people director there in 2 roles before taking the group people director role at Greggs, and then progressing through that into a broader distribution and operations, retail and people role, and taking on the CEO role a couple of years ago. She also does a voluntary role for the Ministry of Justice, chairing one of their key businesses, which is the Employers Forum for Reducing Reoffending. So it's great to have you with us today. Shirine is the Group CEO of the Co-op. Now, it took Greggs just over 80 years to get a female CEO. It's taken the Co-op about 180 years to get a female CEO.
Congratulations.
But they've made it through different routes. So Shirine's career started in finance roles in McDonald's and in IBM, and operations roles in the US and here. But she then went into the insurance industry with the Lloyd's market, and eventually became the COO of Lloyd's of London. Where she did an amazing transformation, modernising the place through technology, but also through changing the kind of people that they were hiring from outside the insurance industry before she joined the co-op as CFO and then progressing to CEO. And in her fun time, she's a non-exec on Persimmon's board. But Shirine hasn't travelled quite so far to be with us today, but she has during her career, so I think, or her life, from Lebanon to Australia to the US and here. So it's great to have you with us today. And then our third panellist is Alison from DLA, so a woman who's risen to the top in a man's world. And Alison is the global head of infrastructure funds sector group for DLA. And so she's in a sort of interesting mix of construction and infrastructure and investment. And I suspect, Ali, that when you were first in that world, you would often be the only woman around a table. And often. And I know from what Mark's told me that you're now driving a lot of this work in DLA to change that for future women. Absolutely. So great to have you with us. And finally, Denise, where to start? Mark has already shared some of the highlights, but she's been in at the head of what's now the FTSE Women, we know as FTSE Women Leaders, but previously was the Davis Review, the Hampton-Alexander Review, for 14 years. And she's announced that she's going to be stepping down from that at the end of this month. As I thought about that, I was a headhunter, I call myself a headhunter. I thought, what an amazing opportunity. Here's a woman who's had a stellar executive career in the gas and energy space, and then she's had non-executive roles in insurance and all sorts of things. And I thought, yes, she'll make a great chair Ned somewhere. And then I thought, poor Denise, she probably needs a rest.
Tired, really tired.
Really, really tired. But actually, Denise, you have got so much to be proud of. I mean, Mark's talked about some of the places that you have shifted the dial, but it's been the way you've done it, through she has an amazing way of getting people to do things, a most lovely way, but a very persuasive way, and she's always worked collaboratively, and many of you in the room will have worked with her like that. But we applaud you, and thank you for your leadership, Denise. But I do know that you'd be the first to say that we've got a long way to go. So why don't you kick us off this with the panel now by just giving us some of the highlights from this year's review.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Joëlle, for that very kind tribute, and to Mark also, and for hosting us. And to others, I know, Roisin, we've twisted your arm to contribute to our report in the past. Thank you, and we will be knocking on other doors too next year. So, and thank you all of you for joining and coming to listen here today. Look, I think if Mark did a really great job of talking through the numbers and where we are. I think if you look back to when this all started, which was in 2011, which isn't that long ago, we had just 9% women sitting on FTSE 350 boards, and today there's 42%. Then by anybody's measure in a decade, particularly on this subject, which we've been going at for a long time, that's revolutionary progress, actually. And that's down to UK business, that's down to British business, who quite firmly got behind all of this in a way we didn't even know if they would to begin with. And just to be clear, most other European countries have made progress with legislation and quotas and fines and penalties. We've had none of that. And progress comes in the numbers, but it comes in many other forms too. And I think because we've taken a voluntary persuasive route, the learnings, the understanding that we have in the UK on this topic is light years away from some of our other European countries. I was last week in Brussels talking at an event there, and really their understanding, their sophistication on this topic is nowhere near what ours is. So, you know, we've got a lot to be grateful for. And I think during the whole of my career, which has been very long, this was you know, right up until a decade ago, maybe a bit more, this was a career-limiting conversation for a woman to have in the workplace, for anybody to have in the workplace. And, you know, it is now a core and critical business topic. It used to be dealt with a bit by HR and a little department down the corridor. No more. This is really central to organisational strategy in the UK. You know, in other terms of progress, there are women, there's over 1,000 women now sitting on public listed boards that without this initiative and the effort of business would have been just waiting in the wings, you know, to look at me, could I get picked? And that, you know, a new career track for women later on in their careers is something we should all be very proud of. But we still have a way to go. I mean, although the charge for a board started in 2011 on leadership, which we class as the exec committee, so the top 10, say, in any FTSE company and the top 50 private companies, and the direct reports, which is maybe a cohort of somewhere around 80 of the biggest jobs in an organisation. That push only began in 2016, so we are further behind in terms of that drive. And today women are around 35% in that layer. The other measure that we have is women in the top 4 roles, so the 2 key roles on the board, which are chair and the senior independent director, or the deputy director, and the CEO and the FD. And we're tracking progress there, and we've asked all of the 400 companies within scope by the end of 2025 to have 1 woman in at least one of those 4 roles. Now, we're doing really well on SIDS. We've got about 47%, almost parity, women in SIDS of our cohort of 400 Britain's biggest companies. Typically 26,000 roles we capture and monitor every year. So the scope is ambitious and huge. If we look at FDs, FTSE 100, about 25% of FD roles in the FTSE 100 are women. So, you know, that's coming on up quite nicely. Chairs, not dissimilar, around the same level. CEOs, poor. Going nowhere, actually. Anything we should be worried about? The CEO is worrying. The progress we've made on the CEO, it is worrying. I'll admit that. You know, typically for every, it's not that women aren't appointed, they are, but for every woman that's appointed in the law of small numbers and another one leaves during the year, then, you know, we're plateauing. And why is that? Well, I think in part it shows we've still got a very long way to go. That women in that really top job is still not quite the norm. We haven't normalised that in the way we have women at the top table. And I think, you know, in our cohort, there's less than 300 of these jobs. They're highly paid, they're powerful, and the turnover is quite low for obvious reasons. So, you know, to some extent, this was always going to be the last hill to climb. And when we see good representation of women in the CEO role, then we know that, you know, this job is pretty much done. Will it ever be done? I don't know. But there's lots of other, you know, lots of other great progress and positives to take out of this. And every single year, most of the metrics tick up by a few percent. And I think what is very positive and flattering to women in the CEO in the top job is the changing style of leadership, which we focused on in the report this year. And, you know, business has changed dramatically. The context within which business operates has changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years, typically post-pandemic. Ways of working have changed. The rules within which business operates has changed. If you take #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, the whole rise of social media and the voice of employees in the workforce, it's a very different place to the one that it was 6 or 7 years ago. And the topics with which leaders need to deal with are changing dramatically too. Generation Z, mental health, different ways of working, you know, complicated topics like Roe versus Wade if you operate in the States, and that requires a very different leadership. These are topics that many of our leaders wouldn't have felt comfortable talking about at the kitchen table, never mind the board table. And I think that all flatters women's skills and women's interests, and that is all, you know, a positive indicator and hope for the future, but a way to go for sure.
We don't have stats that accurately say what the difference is between the global UK picture and the Northwest or the North more generally. But I'm just interested to hear from the panel what sort of things you think we should be looking at. And I'll perhaps start at that end, Ali. And what sort of initiatives should we be looking at to drive further gender equality in our boards and leadership teams?
For me, there is quite a way to go, not necessarily on the numbers, but in the lived experience of being a woman in a more senior position. I think it's the day-to-day that really is going to keep that increase sustainable. Because one of my concerns is we do increase the number of women in the teams, we do increase women coming up into leadership, but is that sustainable, and are they going to stay? Are they going to stay for the duration? And for me, the specifics of your question, it's helping and supporting people at a more junior end. I think, in the initiatives, we have lots of helpful partners, lots of helpful people in senior leadership roles, but actually my big fear is we lose such a huge number of people at sort of, in the legal world, sort of 2 to 7 years qualified, that we need to put all our effort and energy into that cohort, I would say. So mentoring, some role sharing, more engagement, more encouragement at that level, because then I think we'll get that broader pool to make it sustainable. Because I do fear that we get people to the top and then there's a very high turnover and it's not a sustainable model.
Shirine, thoughts from you?
Just to follow on from that, I think the question is, why do people drop out? Why do women drop out? They may drop out because they have caring responsibilities, because they have children, and that's certainly something that within the co-op we actively focus on. So flexible working. It only applies to our head office really, because we're in stores, we're in funeral homes. The vast majority of our people cannot do working at home. But what we try to instill is a culture, and I say this out loud over and over: family first, work second. Now, I don't know that everybody at the top of organizations would actually believe that. They may think work first, family second, but I say it all the time, and I really mean it. The other thing, we had an International Women's Day event, and one point that I brought up was, if you think about the point at which women become executives, or the average age of people when they become CEOs, for men, that's when they've developed their careers to a certain point. For women, it's where they've developed their careers to a certain point, but it's where menopause starts to hit as well. And for us, again, it's really important to open that conversation and make it mainstream for women and for men to recognize that actually, if you can get women over that hump, because there's the caring potentially, there's flexible working, there's being a parent, but there is that next hump. And I described it in our event to say, it literally happened to me. I was appointed as CEO, and I thought, well, suckers, it's going to happen to every other woman. It's not happening to me. I'm 50 years old. It's not going to happen. Well, it did, and my ears were ringing, and it was the strangest thing. My ears were ringing. I felt anxious, and I felt a bit, and I thought, my God, this is it. I've finally been appointed to this role. I can do great things with this company. I've got the most amazing team in the world who are going to help me, and now I'm going to fall over the edge. And luckily, because we do have diversity on our teams, one of my colleagues, I told her about it, and she said, it's no big deal. You just you just get some HRT. And I said, well, okay, I'll go do that then. And, but if you don't have other women around, and if you can't talk about it, and if you can't talk to other men about it, we had very open conversations. We even talked about the menopause that men might go through. But if you can open that up, then you can bring people to that next level as well. But you have to recognize those drop-off points and take everyone with you. And for me, one last thing, the really important thing is not just have it apply to women. Whatever we do for women, we do for men as well. So the adoption policies, the fertility policies, all of them have to apply to men, the flexible working, so that we have genuine equality and that it applies to all.
Thank you. Thank you. There are lots of things I'd like to follow up later, but Roisin, some of your thoughts.
And all of the above. So I completely agree with everything that's just said. Just to build that, I think to your original question, I think there's probably three things that we need to think about. I think one is the talent development pipeline. So I do think that you can't get chief executives of the future if you're not doing lots of work just now with all of your junior talent and finding those opportunities and stretching them and identifying the potential. So I think that's something we identified when the David Davis report first started, was actually we'll never get to the point at the top just by potentially maybe putting not the right people in. We have to start at the base and we have to build the talent so we are very confident we appoint the right people. I think number two is role modelling. So I do think that if you can't see something, you can't emulate it. So I think the more that people do get appointed into senior positions, I think then for more junior people in the organisation, any gender, any diversity characteristics need to be able to see that further up. And then I think they can say, well, if that person can do it, I can do it because I share those characteristics. And then I think number three, very importantly, and it probably builds on Shirine's point, I think honesty. So I am forever, when I'm talking to our teams and Greg's, I am forever telling them how nervous I feel, how I've not got it all sorted, how, I don't have everything, I feel guilty. And, sometimes I'm not the best mum in the world, sometimes I'm not the best CEO in the world, sometimes I question, can I do it? I go up and do a presentation, I'm shaking at the side, because I think there's a danger that people almost think they've got it sorted, they can do it. And actually, the more honest we are about our vulnerabilities, whatever they may be, where we are in the life cycle, what else we've got going on at home, I think the more then the conversations are other people that have also got vulnerabilities don't feel they're insurmountable. They feel that, well, if they've coped with that, I can cope with this. So I think that honesty is really important.
I'd quite like to pick up on a point you made there, Shirine, about taking men along with you. Perhaps, Ali, is there something, because we talked about the law being a male-dominated industry, but just about how you've taken men along with you, and Mark alluded to allyship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I've been very privileged and lucky to work in businesses where every man, I've never experienced a man who's gone, no, you shouldn't, or no, we won't support. So I think there is a real sense of business leaders in the law do want more diversity of all types, do want to support initiatives, do want to engage. I suppose the problem is, what does the practical reality of that look like? What do we need to do? And I think that's where the conversation falls off a little bit at the moment, in terms of the law is quite a structured model, and business is a relatively structured operating model. And I think sometimes we need to talk about how to evolve that model and change that, because we're increasing the diversity within a business, which everyone's supportive of, but we've then got to, the business and the model has got to reflect that diversity and be willing to flex back. And I think that's what we need to be looking at now. And I think you can, and we need to bring the whole business, and it's not just men and women, it's people with all sorts of different views on the world and approaches to life. And again, from a legal perspective, the fee earning community, the business services community, all the sort of ecosystem of the entire operation need to come along together. But I think I couldn't agree more with the communication and the honesty point. It's talking about the challenges, it's being willing to flag the concerns of our team or ourselves and say, look, this just doesn't work for me. The model is doing this, but my life experience doesn't fit into that at the moment. It might do again in the future, but You know, I've got a young daughter, and sometimes some of the challenges and the policies and processes don't work with that for me at the moment. But if I wasn't living that, and if I just sat quietly and thought, oh God, I'm just failing, this is just terrible, I'm not, you know, delivering what I need to do as a mum or as a partner or whatever, if I just sat quietly and didn't say that, I think that's why we're not getting the change and we don't bring people along. But I think we start from a great position in the law of people want diversity, people support diversity, but without the conversations, and we're not going to change that practical reality. And it's that flex. Yeah. Business and structure has got to be willing to flex if we're going to increase diversity and sustain it.
Because Denise, I read in the last report that you talked about the shared challenge, didn't you, for men and women? So just tell me a bit more.
Yeah, it's actually my favourite page in this year's report. What page is it? It's 40s, 26, something like that. Anyway, I can't remember, but take a look later. And you know, we've basically set out that, interesting, we have working titles for these pages. And then as we draft and develop and think about the tone and, you know, what's our focus of the message, we might change it. And the working title for this page was men. And we'd never really done anything particularly focused on men. And then we turned it into a shared challenge, because in talking about it, that's effectively what this topic is. You know, women nor men on their own are going to solve it. And we do need everybody to participate. But also, this is of benefit to everybody in the workplace, not just to men. And so, you know, we set out the context has changed, the rules has changed. These are the things that are sort of helpful, but, you know, not that helpful, like private allyship, so supporting people in private but not being prepared to call out or speak publicly, so mentoring and not sponsoring, and there's a list. And then the fourth bit was really the things that you can do to really shift the dial. And you know, like men parenting out loud in the workplace. You talked about equal policies for men and for women, but critically, equal parental leave, so that men get paid the same amount, the same number of weeks when they have a newborn maybe, as the women do. And that is a game changer. And we've seen it in the Nordic countries. You know, we have nothing like that here, but nothing from government, whereas in other countries it's government sponsored. But business is now stepping in, again, another sign of progress, to do exactly that. And there are 80 to 90 companies, big companies, that provide now equal parental leave. And you know, that changes everything. It changes the picking decisions. So if I'm a supervisor and I'm looking down at my cohort of 35-year-olds, I've no longer got that optic, she's just married, you know, she's maybe going to go off next year, I'll promote him. It's equal chance that the young men will go off as the women. And you know, this is what young men want. This is the expectation of young people, and we talked about the sort of disconnect a bit as well between leaders and young people. And you know, if you talk to youngsters in the workplace, then the economics of owning a house and running a family require these days 2 workers. And that's their expectation. Women and men are equally educated. And so it's about, you know, we talk about gender balance, and we really mean gender balance, and but to balance things up now, you need men to participate more in the home space and to parent out loud in the workplace. And you need women to step up and step into some of the bigger jobs and be appointed, be picked actually for those bigger jobs, and share out some of the burden and responsibilities in the home place. And that's the next, you know, we're just starting to pitch at that, but that is the next game changer for us.
Shirine, did you want to add anything there on the role of men?
Look, I agree with everything. I guess one thing happened with my leadership team, which is about 50-50 male and female, when we were deciding when we were going to have our meetings. And we have a longer meeting on a Tuesday. Most people are there in person. And we all wanted to catch up on a Friday as well. And we were trying to pick the time to have that Friday meeting. And there was a long discussion about, you know, can't have it too early, because that is the one day that I know I can drop my children off at school. And every single person who was saying that was a man. And I didn't say a word, but I thought, yes, we finally actually come over a hump here. That we absolutely have the parenting out loud and the complaining out loud, and it's not just, children, it's dogs and parents and everything else, so everyone does their parenting out loud. But it's also the feeling that, yes, it's actually okay to put my family first. I can tell you there has been no drop-off in productivity. There has been no drop-off in terms of what people have actually accomplished. Absolutely not, because they balance out their lives. And also, people pick up for each other. So I have a very flat leadership. Sometimes it's not great in that a lot of people, I'm looking at one of the members of my leadership team. People do get quite involved in what you do, right? When sometimes you'd rather they didn't. But the fact is, when you are off, people can step in and they can cover for you, which makes it okay to be off, to put family first. And it's that sort of cultural dynamic, I think, that's incredibly important, that if we can get down through our organization, then that becomes a game changer as well.
And we need to be clear about the benefits for men, actually.
Yeah.
Because the benefits for men in terms of male mental health, in terms of learning to parent independently, in terms of stronger family units, because men are not helpers in the home, they can parent on their own. They have lifelong, as again we've seen in the Nordic countries, lifelong benefits for families, for lower divorce rates, and for mental health and male community, which are lacking male community in the UK. Firmly believe that.
Yeah. Roisin, any stories from Greg's?
No, I mean, probably just a personal story, so it is interesting around. So my husband and I have always worked both full-time and both co-parented. Probably the controlling part of me has probably meant that, not that he wouldn't step in, but then I would just naturally do more. And then getting appointed to this role, we just decided it wasn't right for the children for us both to work full-time, because I just needed to be wherever I needed to be, and therefore he would take a sort of step back. And if I'm honest, it was probably as hard for me in those first few months to almost feel like, gosh, but this is what I normally do, and Brian's very capable of doing it. And I have to say, it's funny, a few things have happened recently, kids' parents' nights, kids' work, and I don't know the answer when it comes to me. And I actually, the other week there, we reflected over breakfast going, interestingly, and we've got into, and I think the children are benefiting. Because actually where my children would have been, Mom, now it's very equal, Dad, and maybe it's not Mum. So I think there's something about us as well. So as well as my husband wanting to step in, I needed to learn to step back as well. And I think there is a little bit of that as well, those maternal instincts. You have to sort of go, right, okay, someone else is more, as capable as me, and it's their time to do it.
Maternal instincts, I think you've put it very nicely. I recognise that in myself. I call it control freakery, actually. And, just need to step back on that one.
Yeah, thank you. So another point that Denise raised at the beginning was leadership changing. I'm going to come to you, Shirine, first. Was there anything there that, and perhaps some of the qualities that women have being more demanded now in the modern leader? How did that resonate with you?
I don't know. You'd be better off asking people who work at the co-op how that's landed, actually. I think from my perspective, the co-op's a very old institution, and certainly when I joined it, it felt very paternalistic. It felt very hierarchical. I don't think it feels quite as paternalistic now. I think that we do have quite honest conversations. I think that we do talk more about personal issues and family issues. When we've implemented change, again, you'd be better off asking people. I think that we did it more sensitively because it's not just me. We have more women leaders who were delivering some of these changes. But the conversations around things like menopause, around flexible working, etc., it does feel much easier when you have a more balanced, leadership, when you have a more balanced group of people having this discussion, because men can talk about it, women can talk about about it. We also have a lot of, same-sex couples who are parenting children on my leadership team and through the organization. So they talk about their experiences as well. Ethnic diversity as well is very, very important because there's another lens on that. We're in Ramadan at the moment as well, so we make sure that we talk about specific needs of people during these times. So I think it's really important, for women to feel that they can talk about these issues, that you have the sorts of conversations that perhaps women might feel more comfortable having. But the truth is, when you open the door, everybody walks in and everyone talks about what's happening in their lives. And that's the great thing, because then you start to bring in real inclusion. You start to make people feel like they can be themselves, the same person at work as they can at home as well. And then I think that that's what then opens the doors for people to be able to progress.
Roisin, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think there is a change in leadership in terms of if you go back a decade or two and what was expected of the leader. So I do think skills like empathy, EQ, understanding, sensitivity, I think they are new skills that are being expected of the leader, whoever that may be.
Men and women.
Men and women, absolutely. And therefore, it probably goes back to that role modelling around just seeing that play out more in the organisation. I do think there is one piece, and I'm probably really lucky, we're in a very low ego, low hierarchical organisation. But actually, the difference probably in my style of leadership versus, my predecessor, who was amazing, it was the CEO and the 9 of us. And I am very much of the opinion it's the 10 of us. The strength of us is it's the sum of the 10, it's not 1 + 9. And I know I am not, if I look at some of my team, including my retail directors here, she's a much more effective retail director than I ever would have been or ever was. And having her skill set there allows me to do my job. And I do think that lack of ego now as a leader is so important that, my mantra is surround myself with people who are much better than I ever could be in the jobs, and we'll all be successful. So I think not having the ego, I do think is very important in leadership as we move forward.
Yeah. Ali, is there things you've seen change in what's being required of leaders?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it goes to the lack of ego, the increase in empathy. I think maybe it was the pandemic, maybe it's generation, whatever word is coming through, I'm not sure if it's Z now. Z, yeah. I think they are demanding, and the world is demanding a different conversation and a different way of operating. And I've felt that in the last sort of even 7 years, the things that were discussed, how things are approached, and what people value in their personal lives has changed dramatically. And therefore, your point about family first, business second, I think that's just going to increase and increase and increase. That is the focus. So our leadership style and approach and our thought processes have got to reflect that change in society. The people coming through, the people who are going to stay in a business are going to think about their choices differently than the way that I did, and I think the way that a lot of people did historically. So we've got to change to be, I think, have more empathy, have more understanding, be more open-minded. We're increasing diversity, we're increasing diversity of experience, of approach. You've got to react to that and listen to it and then evolve. And if we don't do it ourselves, it's certainly going to be demanded by those coming after us, because they're just not going to, frankly, they're not going to do some of the things that I did and that I think we did historically. It's just going to be no. They're not in their law era anymore. They're going to move on and do something else, and that just wasn't a challenge. So,
I'd like to go back to the idea of women as CEOs and terrible stats. And there was another one I read which said, and they stay less time in those roles as well. And the FT recently highlighted the scrutiny and the expectations placed on women in the workplace as being potentially different to those that are placed on their male counterparts. And there's a talk of a sort of double bind that women face. So they're navigating a sort of route between vocal but not shrill, and confident but not arrogant, empathetic but not emotional, and I suppose and I suppose CEOs are just more visible, aren't they, now, and arguably be more scrutinised than ever before. So, Roisin, is the toll greater for women?
I guess I can only comment being a woman, so it's really good. That's back to this lived experience. I mean, I think the best mantra in that is, you bring your whole self to work. You are yourself. It's your personality that got you here. Why would you try? And it's that piece about never try to be the other person, because they're always the best version of that. You will be the best version of yourself. So I guess, I've got strengths, I've got weaknesses, and I do think how you navigate them is actually the support of the team. So as a team, the fact that we're a team of 10, we will make decisions collaboratively. If I'm not right, they will be able to point it out to me. Is it tough? It's relentless. I have to say, I do feel as if when you get into this role, you are always on. There is never a lot of downtime. So then I think you have to find the release valves for yourself. I'm not sure it's any worse though if you're a male or a female. Actually, I think it's just there are certain roles that are relentless. It's a privilege to have them. So therefore, I sort of think, you've got the privilege of having the role. If you surround yourself by amazing people, then I think the team gets you through, and as a team, you progress forwards.
Shirine?
There was a meeting with our council recently where they were reviewing some quite complex information. And one of the key bits of feedback that came out of it was we need a new picture of Shirine. Because we've seen that picture of her so many times. And I just wondered, would they have said that about a man in a suit? I don't know. Our council is wonderful, and I don't think that it's it's saying that they're sexist in any way, but it's just the little things that you still might notice about a woman. For me, look, I agree with everything that Roisin said about having a team that can challenge and cover for you. I also think that, I don't know how you feel, I think one skill that I mastered getting to this point is the art of not giving a shit, right? So if someone thinks I've been emotional or they think I've been shrill, I don't give a shit, right? I had a bad day. And actually men can be emotional and they can be shrill as well. So I try not to beat myself up too much about that sort of thing. I think for me personally, if I feel pressure, it is the balance of the home and work. So yes, my husband picks up more of the load. The children have learned to accept that. The dog has not, right? I am his mother. He's the other person, but the minute I get home, he wants all my attention. And then sometimes I go home and I think, well, the homework hasn't been done properly, and and why we should feed them more vegetables. And I maybe that's just me. Maybe everybody feels that way. But there are moments where I think, God. So the advice that I give to myself is, it took us so long to have children. It was 16 years that we were married. I was 45 when they finally came along. And up to then, I consoled myself not being able to have children by working really hard and being perfect at my job. And the advice that I give myself now is that I'm going to fail a little bit at everything. But as long as I don't fail too much in one part of my life and I spread the failure out equally, so they didn't get their broccoli tonight, I will mash something up into their food tomorrow and they'll eat it. Or this report wasn't perfect in exactly the right way. It was just half perfect. Well, you just have to live with it. And the fact is, most of the time, nobody notices except for you. And I haven't mastered it, to be honest. But there are moments where I think this is where people it might be too much. And then you do see why women might drop off, even in this role.
Ali, anything for you?
Exactly the same. Before I had my daughter, you just could commit everything to work, and everything was perfect. And you had the weekends to rest if you needed to, but it didn't matter because everything was perfect. And everything I could do things quite quickly. I was quite speedy at achieving things. And then now I've realised with my daughter, nothing gets done quickly in our house. And you do half of something and half of something. You can't make everything work. I'm yet to fathom the formula. And the big thing for me that I've had to learn is relying on other people, which I just didn't do. Before I had my daughter, I was independent. I did everything myself. I knew if I just put my head into a problem, I could fix it. I can't do that now. So I've got somebody that I've worked with for 15 years. I rely so heavily on him to have my back if Rem's got a temperature or had a shitty day or a client's being difficult. Rob, I really need you to help. Can you grab this? So having to learn to rely on other people has been a massive change in my approach recently. And yeah, when we find the secret formula, I think that will be the dream. Denise, anything?
Well, I think there's lots in all of that, and I think they're all great comments. Being good enough is how I would describe, Shirine, I think what you're talking about, and you just need to be good enough at everything actually, and we can rather all men and women maybe beat ourselves up, particularly women, that we're not quite in that perfect space, and I think it's good to just remind that. But going back to the original question, do women face greater scrutiny than men? I think they do. Well, I definitely think they do. We ran a panel not very long ago of women in broadcast and media, and they overwhelmingly said they faced huge scrutiny in what they wear, how they speak, how their hair is, and everything. And I think if you look at maybe Alison Rose and the way she was treated last year, irrespective of whether the politics of it and what she did was right or wrong, it was a huge hunt, and however you view that, you might have thought that she had just embezzled several million from the bank or done something completely horrendous. And I think sometimes for the male equivalents in those roles to get that same scrutiny and that same focus, then they do have to do something pretty outrageous, really. And I think that was maybe more a foolish and perhaps innocent mistake. But, what it does show is that we haven't normalised yet women in leadership. And so whenever we see one, it could be a bit like the sort of Kate Middleton stuff that we're seeing now. There's this frenzy, this unhealthy focus on every little twist and turn. And I think we've all got a lot to answer for that. But also, different. Rod, just on a slightly lighter note, I remember sitting on a board and during my appraisal one year, the chair said, what would really help me would be if you just smiled a bit more. And I was like, crikey, what? Well, you don't make me smile. But, I doubt he would have said that to a man in his appraisal. It's like, am I the, fauna around the table or what? Why do I need to smile when I'm in a board meeting and we're talking about serious? So that's the kind of, I think he obviously thought I would bring a bit of a lighter touch or something. And, why?
Bring the jokes.
Yeah. Anyway, I do smile. I can smile, so I don't want people to think.
We know.
But, all the appropriate moments.
Yeah. So let's just talk about the future then, and 2024 and beyond. And there's been great progress on boards. Greg's Co-op and DLA, you've all achieved 40% women on each of your boards, well ahead of the FTSE 225 target date. But there's more to do. So there's more for women in leadership, and there's more for women in the 4 key roles that Denise mentioned, so the chair, the SID, the CEO and the CFO, because progress is really slow. So I suppose, what do you think needs to happen to accelerate that change? Shirine, do you want to?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask because in the co-op, all 4 of those roles are women now. So we've appointed a new SID and a new chair, both women. But, diverse shortlist, very similar interviews. They were the best candidates. Rachel, our CFO, is right there, and there's me. So, and our board is 60% women. So we may have actually gone a bit too far. May need to wind it back a little bit. In terms of what needs to change on boards in general, I think it's some of the same things that we're talking about here. And, some boards are much more conservative, and some chairs are much more conservative. And, there is a need to be able to open up and give people chances sometimes. So if you hired right on spec, some people that are on our leadership or on our board might not have gotten those roles if you didn't have the different mindset, right? Must have done this role before, must have had X numbers of years of experience. If one is willing to look at potential as well as experience and the actual ability to do the job and put people into those roles, then I think that's the first step. But you have to have that mindset. The other point that I would just bring up is I think that the people doing the appointing, you must have a diverse set of people and not just gender across the board. And we were very lucky, at least at the co-op, to have male and female representation. We had ethnic minority representation on the hiring panel, and there we were able to make decisions that perhaps a cold paper review would not have made.
Thank you. Ali, anything from you there?
I agree with all that. I think it's about more of a holistic view of people and the lived experience and the people within the business. So not looking just at what's on paper, talking to people, listening when they respond with ideas, and actually welcoming change. And I keep going back to it, but this has got to be sustainable. There's no point increasing these numbers if people come and go to those senior roles after a year or 2 years. We've got to say, how do we flex at different points and for different reasons at different times of people's lives, or in good times and bad times? We can't be static. And I think the big change to keep people in senior roles in a sustainable way is to learn from the experiences of people now and say, actually, if we just tweak that bit there, if we just change that bit there, then actually that would have kept people for a longer period of time. Because that for me is key. That longevity at senior levels is where you really can change systems and processes.
Yeah. Denise, anything?
I mean, the appointment rate is pretty key here. There's two drivers of progress, and I absolutely get the point that you don't want some revolving door where people are being appointed and leaving. So ultimately, the aim here is about a culture where everybody, all women, all men, feel that they can thrive and be at their best. So that is what we're trying to create in the workplace. Representation is a first driver to that, because if you haven't changed the people around the table, and we've still got just senior white men at every top table, then you have very little hope in changing the culture of an organisation for all the reasons that we've talked about, and we know. And unless you're seeing turnover, the turnover in this cohort that we measure, the 26,000, is about 20% a year. I mean, that's high. Men and women, similar, exactly the same. There's not a lot of difference between men and women. So a lot of those roles in the year are up for grabs. So say 7,000 or 8,000 of those roles are up for grabs. When we measure turnover, and we measure appointment rate of men and women in that cohort. And last year, more than 6, almost 7 of every one of those roles that became available during the 12 months to 2023 went to men. Well, you have to question, at this advanced, evolved stage of what we're trying to do. And remember, we're talking about, direct reports to the exec committee, and so you're picking from the level even further down the organisation to enter that. Then, there's no shortage of talented, capable women that are ambitious for themselves, ambitious for their organisation, yet they're not getting picked. And that's what we've got to keep a focus on. And it's about lifting the lid on every single thing that goes on in your organisation. And that's why this is exhausting, and it's kind of multi-year. program that we're all on. It's not a quick and easy fix, because bias gets everywhere, in everything, in all of your people decisions, in your pay decisions, in your bonus decisions, in pensions, in who gets what work allocation, which will be big for you. And unless you're monitoring and watching and being alert and really reaching down in your organisation to get rid of those things, then it just keeps going, because it's the very structural basis of how British business has been for decades. And so that's where the hard yards and the work is still to go. But there's no shortage of women competent to take on big roles, but they're not right now getting picked.
Roisin?
So I guess the only piece I would probably maybe change tact slightly, I think it's the reminder that diversity around the board table leads to better business results. It's not diversity for diversity's sake. So I do think, and I do think that's something that we probably need to talk up more around, the business benefits of reflecting your customer demographic, the business benefits of having different thoughts around the table. Because I actually think when you can start to quantify it about better businesses do this and it leads to business results, I actually think you take the debate away from one of emotion to one of commercially this just does make sense. And I do think, we work really hard now, even when we've got internal development programs, we look at the demographic of the people that are coming onto the program, even at a very junior level, to make sure that that is reflective of all the broader diversity characteristics. And I actually think what's interesting now is we're talking more about neurodiversity characteristics, and actually the fact that the strength of a team is having that different thinking, and that's not about gender, it's not about ethnicity. So I actually think the debate is getting better and the debate is getting broader, but I do think, while talking about numbers is good, the sort of numbers of people in roles, I do think it needs to come back to, does this make good business sense? Because I think that is the really compelling argument for your shareholders, your colleagues, your customers. So I think constantly trying to bring it back to that is a really good objective playing field.
Can I add something to that as well? It's about ensuring the diversity, as you say, when you're appointing people, when people are going on to programs. We also add in socioeconomic diversity as well, but then it's about what performance reviews are they given, and is it fair? How are pay increases allocated? How are promotions allocated? So previously, I think in my career, would look at the hiring piece, but I'm sure you do it as well. You must monitor it all the way through, because again, that's where you start to see people drop off if you don't ensure equity all the way up.
I think, if I can just add to Roisin's point, I think that's a really great point, actually. And it's interesting because when all of this started, because it was very new, and how on earth are we going to persuade, what was then largely a leadership of men on this topic? And we talked exhaustively and worked very hard on the business case. And it was all of the points that you're making, the kind of economic case of not wasting talent for the, and interestingly, as it sort of got the traction and this became an expectation, partly because it was, it was picked up in the press, it was picked up by shareholders, and people got behind it. We talked a bit less about the business case, but I think what the last year or two has shown is that actually progress is very fragile, and we need to now start going back, because people used to say to me, I don't want you to talk about the business case, I just want you to talk about how to do it, because people have got the business, people understand it, they've got it now, they just want to know what are the actions, how do we shift this dial? And so for quite a few years we've been talking a lot about the how. And actually, I think for all the sort of, things shift, don't they? The debate on this subject has shifted a bit recently, if you're kind of paying attention, and there's quite a few, as Mark reflected, quite a few naysayers coming up and feeling confident in their position as to this has gone too far and what have you. And I do think it's now important that we go back and we start always talking that business case in a way we've sort of got slightly complacent with.
And we're seeing that with our clients, actually, because I suppose the economic climate being a bit more challenging, my fear is that they will revert to the same old, what I know. And I suppose as headhunters, I feel we've got a really important role to highlight that business case. And actually, now isn't the time to be reverting to the past. Now's the time to be leaning further into this. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, no. Roisin, you mentioned something earlier about role models. And I'm just interested, just because I'm curious and a bit nosy, who've been the role models for you? I'm going to ask the rest of you as well.
Gosh, I really wouldn't pick out one individual. It's funny, actually. I think the role models have changed as I've gone through my career. So the role models, I think, when I was more junior, were the people at the top of the organisation. So when I joined ASDA on the graduate scheme, it was Archie Norman and Alan Leighton. Wow, awesome. So, and you would see how they would behave, and you would see how they would manage conferences and how they would interact if they came round your shop, and therefore I think you learned lots from then. I then think as I went through my career, it was probably people that were closer to me as my line managers. So I'd one in particular. So I actually turned down my first director role because my daughter was 4 weeks old, and I said, absolutely not, I'm not going for the role. And he was no longer my line manager, but he heard on the grapevine I'd done this, and he took the time to pick up the phone to me and said, I cannot believe you have said no. And I said, oh, Keith, she's 4 weeks old. I don't know if I can be a mum, never mind, turn up at work every day. And he says, you absolutely can, and you need to take that step forward, and we will support you. And I do credit him with, my gosh, if somebody hadn't, I always talk about it, if somebody put their hand in the small of my back and just gave me that confidence. And I've had those people all through my career that have almost, when I've thought I can't, they've said, you can. I actually think the role models that I look at now are either my team or the more junior people in the organisation. Because I think sometimes if I'm mentoring a more junior female and they talk about what they're doing, the number of times I sit there going, oh God, I've stopped doing that. I need to get back to that. So I actually think it's probably the Gen Zs that are coming up. I laugh, when I got my first graduate job, I think my questions were, do you get a car? How much do you get paid? And what kind of clothes do you wear? I look at the graduates that come through now and they ask you, so what are you doing on sustainability? What's your purpose? What are your values? And I think, whoa, gosh, you are teaching us something. So I think it's been different people at different times, but I think now it's probably the people within my team that I just admire greatly.
That way, looking at it. Shirine.
I don't think that there's a specific person along the way. I'm going to answer very similar to Roisin. There have been people along the way where you think, goodness, if they can do it, how do I do it? I've always approached those people and said, how do you manage this, or how did you do what you're doing, and what can I do differently? We have Alan Leighton in common. So he. The co-op needed a new CEO. It was in a bit of trouble a couple of years ago. So what I said to Alice, but you go out and find somebody that fits the normal mold of a retail CEO. And all the way through, he just kept saying, no, you're the person who's going to do this. And I kept saying, look, so-and-so's got availability, so-and-so's just left this other big retailer, you might want to approach them. And all the way through, he just said, no, I'm not speaking to anybody else, you are going to do it. And he nudged me along until the point where I thought, well, maybe I should do it. So you do need those people, and like you, I've had those people kind of push me along the way, and I've tried to do the same to others as well.
Thank you. Ali?
I've got a slightly different answer, which is I came into law with a confidence I think my parents gave me that I now realise that I could just do anything. It didn't matter that it was never a thought in my mind that because I was a woman I couldn't become a partner in the biggest law firm in the world. And I now, looking back in retrospect, can't believe that they instilled that confidence in me. But the next person who I suppose continued that dream for me was, I had a specific supervisor, my trainee supervisor. I was going to be a corporate M&A lawyer. That was my role in life. And then she was a construction litigator and didn't even know what that was really. But she was the only woman in the room most of the time, and it was just never a question in my mind that I couldn't do the job and become a partner. And it was actually only later in my career that I looked around and realised that that wasn't normal, and that I was the only woman, and that I was then the only senior woman. And it's only later in my career that I've realised that I was actually quite naive in my junior years. But I thank the people who instilled that naivety in me, because it meant that I cracked on. And then hopefully now I kind of see it with retrospect and go, actually, there's a lot more to do here.
Who've been your role models?
Oh gosh, well, lots. I mean, look, you pick up lots of tips and tricks, I think, from leaders that you see throughout your career and in life as well. And you know, nobody's perfect, but you adopt things and you copy things that you like in both, you know, in both men and women. But I think if I had one, it would be my mum, because she went back to work when I was 2, and that was in the 60s, and she worked phenomenally hard until she was in her 70s. She's now 91. She's had a few knocks herself, but she's always positive, always resilient, and she's happy and healthy. And you might say, well, she was lucky, but I think to some extent you can make your own luck too.
Yeah, yeah.
And she did.
I'm going to take away all sorts from today, but I'm going to ask you to take one thing away, then share it with the others, because we've got to get Roisin on a plane to Belfast. So what's your one takeaway going to be?
I love Shirine's don't give a shit, because I do. I do worry too much sometimes around. You know, I'll leave something going, do a good enough job? Should have done better, should have. And I love that, don't give a shit. So yes, that's my takeaway. Thank you, Shirine. I don't know how to follow that. I'm laughing. Will you skip me for a minute?
Go for it, Denise. Go on, what's your one?
Well, I'm going to say we've got to keep talking the business case.
Yeah.
Got to go back to the business case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the work still to be done and the complacency for me. It's just a reminder that we've done an awful lot, and that, you know, a decade is a really short amount of time. But it would be really disappointing if we stop now. And so it's a double down on actually there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to think about, and a lot of conversations to have. So for me, it's sort of a secondary call to arms, and we can't be complacent.
I think what I'll take away is, in talking about the role models, they were at home, they were at work, they were in different and men and women. And I think it's, my takeaway is, how do we enable at least all of our colleagues and the people that we work with to be able to do that for others? And they need the time and the space and the confidence to be able to do that.
Thank you. Should we just thank our panel for some amazing insight? Thank you all. And huge thanks to DLA and your team, Mark, here in Manchester, putting on today. Thanks to Charlotte and to Sophie, who have done a lot of the work behind the scenes making this happen, and the teams in both places. As Mark said, there's drinks and nibbles at the back. Please do join us, do network. There are some amazing people here to talk to. So have a great evening.